I think I might get started in the interests of trying to keep to time this morning. Welcome to Women's Health Grampians CoRE Community of Practice today on workplace flexibility. My name is Rose Jury and I am the Manager of Strategy and Programs at Women's Health Grampians, and I'm really looking forward today to diving a little bit deeper into workplace flexibility and what it can mean for members of the CoRE Alliance. As you will have noticed, we're recording today's session and we are hoping to get the recording up on our website in the next couple of days, and we will share that link with you if you wanted to share it through your organisations. And also, if you could place your name, your organisation and the traditional lands that you are joining us from into the chat box so we can have a sense of who's here today. I want to start today by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land that we are meeting on. I'm on Wadawurrung country here in Ballarat, and I pay my respects to their elders past and present. People are joining us today from lands across the Grampians region and across Victoria, and it's wonderful to see the many lands that people are coming to us from today. And I pay respect to traditional owners and elders from other communities who might be here today as well. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples have the oldest continuous living culture in the world, and sovereignty was never ceded. This always was and always will be Aboriginal land. So as I said, today we are delighted to be here talking about workplace flexibility. This is a key enabler of workforce participation, of financial security, of productivity, and an enabler of a work-life balance that supports the myriad ways that our families are structured today. It's one of the 7 indicators of the Gender Equality Act, and it is profoundly shaped by gender norms. Over the next hour and a half, we're going to hear from 3 women who are at the forefront of this space, and we'll follow that up with a panel discussion where we get to dive a little bit deeper into the topic. But I am firstly devastated to say that Dr. Nikki Vincent, the Commissioner for Gender Equality in the Public Sector, is unexpectedly unwell and sends her apologies this morning. So she has actually lost her voice. So there is no way that she could present today, but I am very pleased to welcome in her place Lily Craig, who is the Acting Director at the Commission for Gender Equality in the Public Sector, and she will be talking to Dr. presentation today. So I am very excited to hear from Lily and also to hear from Jo O'Brien, who is the Program Director for the Champions of Change Coalition, and Miranda Boddington, who is the Organisational Development Manager at Viva Energy, who will all be talking about different facets of workplace flexibility, from defining flexibility in the workplace and its impact on gender equality to current trends in Victoria and what flexibility can look like in practice. For those of you who regularly attend our CoRE communities of practice, this will be a little bit more like a webinar than our normal style of COP. So if you have any questions, please enter them into the chat box at the bottom of your screen, and we will endeavour to get to them in the panel discussion when there'll be a little bit more opportunity for interaction. So first of all, it is my pleasure to introduce you to Lily Craig, the Acting Director from the Commission for Gender Equality in the Public Sector. Lily, we are so pleased that you can come along so unexpectedly and at the last minute and talk to the presentation that Dr. Nikki Vincent was going to give. So I am delighted to hand over to you, Lily.
Thanks so much, Rose. I really appreciate it. As Rose just mentioned, Dr. Nikki Vincent really sent her apologies. She was really looking forward to this. And unfortunately, her body and her health had other plans for her. So she sends her sincere apologies. But I'm really thrilled to be able to take her place and talk to you all today. So thank you for having me. Just before I start, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners from the lands on which I'm coming to you from today, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and I pay my respects to elders past and present and to any Aboriginal elders that might be with us on the call today. It's very appropriate that we're meeting virtually to talk about workplace flexibility. I think virtual and hybrid work provides participation and opportunities for people to engage that otherwise wouldn't be possible, which has been absolutely evidenced by Nikki not being able to turn up this morning and me being here by 10 a.m. So I think we've already proven before we've even started that there's some real benefits to hybrid meetings. But I think it also goes some way to addressing the tyranny of distance that can be a particular challenge in regional and rural Victoria. Virtual presentations, we know, can open up participation for people who may not be able to access these meetings or forums or events otherwise due to location or health reasons or disability. So it can really be a game changer for inclusion. Workplace flexibility is about more than simply providing the option to work from home. It can include working more hours over fewer days, flexible start and finish times, job sharing, shift swapping, and a plethora of other arrangements. If Dr. Vincent was here today, I'm sure she would have mentioned her job share arrangement early in her professional career. It was back in the 90s, and at the time a job share was unheard of. So it presented her with a workplace that was flexible and accommodating of her caring needs and other personal situations that she was going through in the time, and allowed her to succeed and really grow in her career. But it's really also set the tone for our Commissioner and how she's gone on to lead other organisations, including ours. At the Commission, we have a really strong culture of flexible work, and the Commission has been integral to creating this. And there's a real approach and attitude in our workplace from the Commissioner of, I don't mind when you do the work or where you do the work, as long as you do the work. So it's about being able to work around the school run, work from home, work after hours. And it's something that nearly everyone in our team of about 20 staff take up. Pretty much almost everyone is on flexible arrangements. And the benefits are immense, not only for the employees, but for employers as well. Despite previous concerns of employers around lost productivity, the Productivity Commission found remote working didn't reduce employees' productivity during the forced experiment, also known as COVID, but that some firms found potential productivity improvements and cost savings in a world of more work from home. A 2021 survey found that 90% of workers said they were as productive or more productive working remotely compared to the office. When so many workplaces suddenly swiveled to working from home literally overnight, this forced a mind shift switch from the cultures of presenteeism to more of a focus on output. And this really challenged the long-held ideas by some leaders that staff had to be present to be productive. You might have seen just a few days ago, Elon Musk has announced that he is scrapping remote work at Twitter months after doing the same at Tesla, but there are very few following this lead. The Australian Bureau of Statistics found most people want to continue working from home in some form, so now it's about how we build on what we've learned over the past 2 years as we redefine our workplaces and flexible working. Local and global research has found women, and particularly those with young children, are more likely to request flexible working arrangements, including working from home. In contrast, men are less likely to request flexible work due to a perceived impact on their career progression. This means that women are more likely to be working from home and men are more likely to be working from the office. And with hybrid work here to stay, how do we make sure that it works for everyone? One of the things we need to do is address the risk of gender inequality that's created by proximity bias. Proximity bias is a form of unconscious bias whereby those who aren't physically present in the workplace may be overlooked for promotions, projects, or other professional development opportunities. In most cases, it's not a deliberate punishment for those working at home. Instead, it's more of a case of out of sight, out of mind. The former General Electric CEO, Jack Welch, famously said, "The road to the top is paved by being there." But overseas studies have shown a correlation between salary and proximity to the CEO's office. Employees who sat closer to the CEO generally had higher salaries. Other research has found that remote workers receive lower performance evaluations and smaller raises compared to their in-office colleagues. In 2014, a study found remote employees had a 50% lower rate of promotion compared to their office colleagues, and often they were perceived as being out of touch with the office. While this has changed dramatically since COVID, the post-COVID hybrid workplace presents new risks for new inequalities. Women who changed their working hours during the pandemic were more likely to have increased the amount of time they spent on household management and caring for children, and women were twice as likely to report higher stress levels than pre-pandemic and 3 times as likely to feel burned out. In 2022, Deloitte's global survey into women at work found that almost 58% of women working in hybrid environments felt excluded from important meetings, and 45% said they did not have enough exposure to leaders. Employers need to make flexible working work for women by providing a clear commitment and clear expectations, and by adjusting workload. The Deloitte survey found that 90% of women believe workloads won't be adjusted accordingly if they request flexible working options. So we need to look at the gap between expectations and reality when it comes to workload. An organisation or a team level, you should be able to establish an agreed way of working to be inclusive and flexible, and to ensure that those working from home can still access FaceTime and airtime with leaders and sponsors. This is a case of fixing the system rather than expecting women to bridge the gap or to lean in. We established the commission during lockdown, so it was quite a few months before the team met in person, and even longer before we had our own permanent office for anyone to even come to. As a result, we've sort of always been focused on the output side of things and not presenteeism, so adapting to a hybrid way of working, luckily, hasn't been too much of an adjustment to us since it's sort of been that way since our inception. But at our last planning day, our team committed that all meetings, no matter what day, time, hour, would be hybrid. And we've discussed how to make sure that all meetings are inclusive for anyone joining remotely. I know a lot of people have tried to start hybrid meetings, and there's still things you need to work through about how to make it work best for everyone and make sure they are still inclusive and that everyone at home and in the office is still being heard. Flexibility and a hybrid first approach is key for us, and so far it's working. Organisations also need to address cultural and structural barriers that prevent men from accessing parental leave and flexible work, and thus taking on a greater share of the unpaid work in the home. We know that having kids is a major catalyst for gender inequality, with women more likely to return to work part-time and take significantly longer periods of parental leave. In contrast, after the first child is born, men are more likely to increase their working hours. This is about the outdated gender stereotypes of the father as the breadwinner and the mother as the homemaker. And even though modern families don't look like this anymore, these unequal parenting notions still persist. Men don't see themselves as primary or sometimes even equal carers of kids. Dr. Liana Leach, a researcher at the Australian National University, published a range of Facebook ads in 2018 for parenting research, and she found that 98% of respondents who said they would participate in the research were mothers. Only when she changed the wording from parents to dads did men start replying to the ads. They didn't think parents described them. Likewise, men still don't think parental leave and flexible work arrangements to accommodate parents includes them. In 2014, Liz Broderick, the Sex Discrimination Commissioner, found that 27% of men who had taken parental leave had experienced some kind of repercussion from a boss or from their colleagues as a result. So men are less likely to ask for leave, and the default persists. Women continue to carry the load. Unless we establish workplace cultures where men are taking up their full parental leave entitlements or flexible working options when they want to, we're going to struggle to achieve equality. So this is really about making systemic change. That's why leave and flexibility is one of the key equality indicators under the Gender Equality Act. Many of you will be familiar with the Act, but for those of you who aren't, the Gender Equality Act came into effect in March 2021. Covers about 300 organisations across Victoria and over 450,000 employees. And that includes local councils, universities and public health systems. It's the first of its kind in Australia, but there are a lot of states already nipping at our heels. South Australia is following our lead and has introduced a really similar bill, and Tasmania is about to do something very similar as well. So there is some very exciting things happening across Australia. The Act also places a positive duty on organisations to take action on gender equality, and that's a really important element of the Act. The 4 sort of cornerstone obligations of the Act are for organisations to undertake a workplace gender equality audit, for that audit to be then used as the basis for which a gender equality action plan, which includes strategies and measures, is developed, to report against their progress of that gender equality action plan, and to undertake gender impact assessments on all new and up for review policies, programs and services. The Act is also the first of its kind to incorporate intersectionality into equality law. So that's the overlapping attributes that compound experiences of gender inequality, such as ethnicity, sexual orientation, disability, age, and a whole range of other factors. So, for example, a woman of colour might experience discrimination for her skin tone and her gender. It also provides transparency to keep organisations accountable to their community and also to the Commissioner. So by having to publish progress reports, publish gender equality action plans and publishing the workplace gender audit data, organisations can be held accountable by their employees, their communities and also each other. And I think that that's one of the critical elements of the Act. We recently published the audit data from the first ever workplace gender equality audit, which is the most comprehensive data set on public sector gender equality we've ever had in Australia, which is pretty cool. We also launched our Insights portal, which allows the public to explore individual organisations' results, and that's what we were just talking about that transparency element. And we published the baseline report, which produced the sector-wide findings. So across the whole Victorian public sector, what are we seeing? And then there's also a breakdown of different industries too. Organisations submitted data on 7 gender equality indicators, and those are gender composition of board, gender composition at all levels of the workforce, recruitment and promotion practices, leave and flexible work, the pay gap, gendered segregation in the workforce, and sexual harassment. The first audit is the baseline for measuring improvement at an organisation, a sector-wide and a statewide level, and progress reports are required every 2 years. The first progress report has actually just received an extension from the Commissioner, and so now everyone's progress reports are due on 20th of February 2024 instead of the end of October 2023. This is to allow time to prepare for the progress reporting cycle, recognise the challenges of COVID, but also that this is the first time this is being done, and there was, extensions due to COVID with the first audits and GEEPs as well. So we asked organisations that have obligations under the Act to provide data on the proportion of their employees using formal flexible work arrangements, not including mandatory working from home during the pandemic. We also asked for the number of senior leaders using flexible work arrangements, and by breaking down data by gender, employment level and type of employment, we have a picture at an organisation and sector-wide level of who's working flexibly. In all, about 1 in 4 workers covered by the Act had a flexible working arrangement in place. This was most common in government departments, universities, local government and public health. Working remotely was the most common type of flexible work arrangement, followed by flexible start and finish times. More than 3/4 of those using flexible work arrangements were women. As part of their flexible work arrangement, women were 8 times more likely to work part-time than men. Part-time work and job sharing in senior leadership was more common for women compared to men. Almost 8 in 10 parental leave takers were women, and the average length of time for a woman accessing parental leave was 20 weeks of paid leave and 22 weeks of unpaid leave. For men, it was 4 weeks of paid leave and 2 weeks of unpaid leave. So women's time out of the workforce lasted 8 times longer than men's. Women were also more likely to take carers leave at 68%. And unsurprisingly, women were more likely than men to believe that flexibility, family responsibilities and caring are barriers to their success in their organisation. Our audit data also found that women are underrepresented in senior leadership across Victoria's public sector. Women make up 66% of the workforce, but only 46% of senior leadership roles. The data also clearly found that women aren't getting equal opportunities for career development or advancement. Men make up only 34% of the overall public sector workforce, but they receive 37% of promotions. Men are also more likely to receive career development training opportunities, internal secondments and higher duties. All occupations and all but one industry had gender pay gaps in favour of men. The total remuneration pay gap across Victoria's public sector was 15.6%, which means that on average men took about $19,000 more home than women across the 2020-2021 financial year. The Global Institute for Women's Leadership found that women pay a parenthood penalty, and taking time out of work stalls their career progression and contributes to the gender pay gap. In the latest edition of KPMG's She's Priced Less research, also found that gender discrimination remains the primary contributor to the gender pay gap in Australia at 36%, but that it's closely followed by caring for family at 33%. Australian data also shows that women who experience intersecting forms of inequality are more likely to leave the workforce after having children. This trend is apparent for migrant and First Nations mothers, as well as mothers with disability, mothers caring for others with disability, and young mothers. We know that flexibility is important for staff retention, but there's more work to be done to understand the different needs of people accessing flexible work arrangements, particularly where that intersects with other attributes. Our first round of audit had gaps when it comes to intersectionality, and this isn't surprising. It's something that we expected, as some organisations have never previously collected this data, and many don't have the systems right now to enable this. So as a result, there are gaps in our analysis, and it's really important to us to have robust data so that we don't marginalise vulnerable groups further. Our team's doing more work to understand intersectionality in the Victorian public sector, and we will release a report focused on intersectionality next year. And that will include consultation and draw on the research projects that we're currently funding in these areas. So where to next? We are keen to see organisations introduce greater flexibility so people of all genders can balance their paid and unpaid work. Flexibility should be embedded in systems and cultures and shouldn't be a barrier to career progression. To guard against this and the hangover of workplaces with a culture of presenteeism, organisations should be collecting data to measure and evaluate their flexible working arrangements. In fact, the Gender Equality Act requires this of all organisations that it covers. Audits will continue to shed light on who is working flexibly and how. This includes efforts to support more fathers and partners to take up parental leave and flexible work, equipping managers with the skills to manage flexible and hybrid teams, and monitoring career progression for those using flexible work arrangements or taking leave. That's it for me today, but I want to really thank you all for having me, and I look forward to hearing some of your questions shortly.
Thank you, Lily. That was really fascinating to hear about all the research that, how the Commission has been collating all that data that you have been receiving. And to hear you kind of talk about the potential of workplace flexibility, but also the risk and how gender norms around who does what really aren't changing, and who picks up workplace flexibility. So thank you. Looking forward to hearing a bit more in the panel. I would now like to introduce our next two speakers who are going to present together. Jo O'Brien is the Program Director of the Champions of Change Coalition, and Miranda Boddington is the Organisational Development Manager at Viva Energy. At the Champions of Change Coalition, Jo works with CEOs and senior leaders to develop and implement strategies to improve gender equality within their organisations and broader society. Jo has extensive experience working across multiple industries, including transport and logistics, telecommunications and pharmaceuticals. Her roles have focused on culture and leadership, engagement, change management and human resources. Miranda has worked in HR in the oil and gas and retail industries for over 20 years, commencing her HR career with Shell, now Viva Energy Australia, at the Geelong refinery in 2001. She's held various HR manager roles at the Geelong refinery, in supply and distribution, and in the Shell upstream business in Perth. She's also has experience in major change programs, and prior to joining Viva Energy, Miranda worked in HR and learning and development roles at Coles Myer. I am looking forward to hear them today talking about the business case for flexible work, shifting expectations around flexibility, and your practical examples of how that works as well. So welcome to you both.
Thanks so much, Rose. It's wonderful to be invited to speak to everybody today. I would like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, who are the traditional custodians of the land in which I am today. I'd like to pay respects to elders both past and present and extend that respect to other Indigenous and Australians present. Miranda and I are very excited to be talking about the paper. Lily, it was wonderful to actually hear all of the data and the actions that are happening across the broad aspect of gender equality, and the gender action plans, I'm sure, are going to make a significant difference. And if I reflect back on my own career, as we heard the reflections that perhaps Dr. Nikki Vincent was going to make, it reminded me of my long career so far, 25 years. And I remember after I had my first child, I wanted to come back part-time. There was one part-time opportunity in the organisation, which consisted probably about 300 people in a site-based environment. So very few opportunities for part-time work. And as we've heard from Lily, there's some great opportunities that people can now take up, but we also know that there's a long, long way to go as well. Before I jump into talking more about the paper today, I thought it might be helpful for people just to, for me to talk a little bit about the Champions of Change Coalition, what we do, and our objectives. So the Coalition is a globally recognised, innovative and proven strategy for advancing women in leadership, gender equality and inclusion in the workplace. As part of the strategy, leaders with power and influence step up together, forming a high-profile coalition to lead change on gender equality, diversity and inclusion in their organisations and communities. The strategy engages members as champions, not because they are perfect, but because they publicly commit to leading practical, constructive and innovative actions to accelerate change. The work of the Champions of Change is backed by a successful methodology for increasing women in leadership and creating the conditions and cultures that enable them to thrive. By focusing on developing safe, respectful, and inclusive work practices and cultures for all, members are also driving generational change on harmful gender stereotypes and norms that currently undermine women's participation, safety, and economic security. Today, the Champions of Change Coalition comprises more than 260 CEO-level leaders across the world. In terms of our objectives are to achieve gender equality, advance more and diverse women into leadership, and build respectful and inclusive workplaces for the future. We also contribute to the goal of sustainable gender balance at board level and in executive teams through a long-term focus on achieving gender balance across our organisations. Creating the conditions and culture that enable all employees to thrive is critical. Even when organisations are closer to or have gender balance, women can still face significant disadvantages. Our experience is that you cannot increase women's representation without shifting entrenched workplace systems and practices that impede it. And we heard that from Lily early on. By doing so, conditions and cultures will not only serve to benefit women, but everyone those systems have traditionally worked against. In terms of how we work, very briefly, our members recognise the value of stepping up together to drive change on gender equality in their organisations across public sectors and throughout our community. As a coalition, we work collectively to publicly share our learnings and our progress, and as individual members implement change within their organisations and publicly advocate for gender equality. And it's within this context of sharing the work of the coalition that we're here today to talk about the resource shifting expectations, flexibility for frontline, shift and site-based roles. As Lily also mentioned, secure flexible work has been a cornerstone strategy for advancing gender equality, a way to enable more people to participate in work while managing responsibilities and interests outside of paid work. Over the last few years with COVID, we know there's been a fundamental shift in the way organisations and their leaders view flexible work. COVID has increased awareness of the benefits of flexible working across our workforces. And the Coalition's most recent work that we'll get into today focuses on enabling flexibility for frontline workforces and looks at ways of creating cultures and workplaces where more people can participate and build secure futures. We know when more employees have access to flexible ways of working, traditional gender stereotypes and barriers that have limited women's engagement and progress in the workplace are disrupted. For example, when all employees are able to play a more active and equal role in caring, more women can play a more active and equal role in the workforce. Overall, access to more flexibility benefits employees, organisations and communities. Creating fully flexible workplaces in all environments is a complex long-term workplace design and investment strategy. It involves engaging and collaborating with many stakeholders beyond our own organisations. The report which we're going to be talking about is sharing our early insights, our experimentation, and we really hope that others can learn from this and continue experimenting and sharing more broadly as well. In terms of the business case for flexible work, we've probably touched on that enough, but just very briefly, we know that flexible work is vital for business continuity and growth. With supply chains under pressure at the moment, labour is in short supply, and the opportunity to engage with a workforce perhaps which has been untapped for some time is real. It's a huge opportunity and businesses can't avoid to actually ignore it. Flexible work is essential for frontline employee attraction, retention and engagement. And despite the significant progress in enabling flexible work for office-based employees, most frontline workers have not benefited from the same flexible work opportunities, especially in operational roles. We know that many employees, frontline employees, see the lack of flexibility as an issue of fairness and equity, and they also want a degree of agency and choice with different flexibility options. We know flexibility is essential for employee health, safety and wellbeing. Offering secure, flexible work options is vital for a psychological, healthy and safe work environment. Flexible work implemented strategically provides employees with economic security and the ability to manage caring and other interests outside of paid work. Frontline staff, we know, are in high demand and rightly so. We want to be able to provide frontline staff with opportunities broadly in our organisations, and we know that flexibility is one of those things that's expected from all employees and especially also frontline staff. In recent years, the default for flexible work has been the ability of employees to work at home. Given the nature of frontline, shift or site-based roles, working at home is just not possible for many people. In fact, it's estimated that approximately 70% of the Australian workforce working in frontline roles are unable to work from home. These roles include operators in manufacturing sites, construction workers, field service workers, frontline workers, police, hospitality, and transport services, just to name a few. So greater innovation is really needed to find solutions to enable flexibility for our frontline workers other than remote work. So it's really with this belief that flexible work is essential for all people across all industries to access that members of the Coalition set out to identify how flexible work can be enabled for frontline workers. Our members sought to understand what's important for frontline workers and what greater flexibility would look like for them. That were also interested in the operational barriers to more flexibility for frontline shift and site-based roles, the operational impact of more flexible ways of working, and then also the industrial relations and legal considerations where that is relevant. So I'm going to pass over to Miranda Boddington now from Viva Energy. Miranda, I'll let Miranda introduce herself and the work that Viva's been doing in regards to flexible work, and then Miranda and I will just tic-tac through the presentation as I describe more about the paper, and Miranda can bring those examples to life. So over to you, Miranda. Thank you.
Thanks, Jo, and good morning, everybody, and thank you for having me. I can certainly vouch for the work that Jo's been doing and the Champions of Change Coalition. I've been involved for a couple of years now, and I'm very lucky to have an extremely passionate CEO, Scott Wyatt, who is really leading the charge on gender equality in our organisation. Whilst we're probably never going to be 100%. It's an ongoing journey. We've certainly come a long way, and I'm really happy to be able to share a few of our activities and our learnings, which I've personally been really really happy to be involved in. It's been quite a valuable experience. I should mention that I'm also on the traditional lands of the Wadawurrung people today, and I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. So I thought it might be good to start just by painting the picture a little bit about Viva Energy and where we've come from and sort of where we're going with this. So I'm not sure if you're aware, but Viva Energy is a producer and supplier of fuels. We supply roughly 25% of fuels in Australia, whether that be petrol, solvents, lubricants, jet fuel, bitumen. And so, as you probably can imagine, our workforce is quite engineering based and quite technical based. We have about 1,400 people in our organisation and a large number of contractors on top of that. And there's about half of our workforce in frontline operational roles. And that is at our refinery in Geelong, where we have around about 500 people working in various engineering and frontline roles. And then we have import terminals around the country. And in addition to that, we have our normal sort of corporate and head office based roles. So I guess the number one challenge for us is that our frontline workers have very much a mindset that they have a, they want to come in and do their job, and they're very proud of the jobs they do. They generally have a trades background and a process type background. So thinking outside of that doesn't always come naturally to them. But in saying that, when we've asked them about what they want, flexibility's been right up there. So I'll get to that. I should also mention that we've got part of our journey over the last few years has really been related to COVID, as I'm sure it has for many of you on the call. And I guess it's also probably helpful just to share with you that going back probably about 4 or 5 years ago, I would say that we had a really leading flexible working policy. However, I would also say that it was probably not accessed by very many people. We liked to say that, we had this great policy, but if you really looked into it, we had a handful of formal flexible working arrangements, which really were occasional working from home. And we had some part-time roles and a few job share roles. But even then, working from home was pretty much really frowned upon. And the part-time roles were really only acceptable if someone was returning from parental leave. So at that time, our CEO, who's extremely passionate, was also trying to implement some different strategies at our Geelong refinery around operators, and that started probably 5 or 6 years ago. So I'll get to that in a moment, because that was ticking along in the background. But we had a huge amount of change during COVID. And what's happened now is, and I know that Lily was mentioning systems and culture in her presentation, but we've seen a major shift in both of those areas. And I can honestly say that I feel like now we have got to the point where for our more corporate roles and office-based roles, we don't use a flexible working application anymore. It's totally left up to the managers and the team members and their senior leaders to work out what they want to do and how they want to make it work, which has been a massive shift and has just increased our engagement across our organisation astronomically. And I'm happy to take sort of any questions on that later on as well. And then in our operational environments, which is really where we wanted to talk about today, we've also seen some really big changes. We're not quite there yet, but we're really starting to see some very creative and innovative thinking around this and ways that we can really increase opportunities for women. So Jo, are you happy if I just keep going and talking about how we engaged our workforce to begin with?
Yeah, that'd be great. And then we might talk about, I'll give the background on the three types of work-based roles, and then we'll come back to that.
Sure. So as part of the Champions of Change work, we've recently did some listening sessions with our operational team members, and that was quite eye-opening. As you can imagine, these are shift-based and site-based roles where they don't have a lot of visibility to senior management and senior leaders. Some of them, working night shift, don't see their leaders very often at all. And we asked them, really, what does flexibility look like for them? What would they like in terms of flexibility, and what's getting in the way? And it was a really worthwhile exercise. We found out that, I guess it's not surprising that flexibility is individual and means different things to different people. But there was also some real quite simple things that we could do as an organisation to try and remove some barriers and to think more broadly about flexibility for those types of roles. And as a result of that, we looked at technology. So we found that simple things like having access to a PC with a camera was vital, because otherwise we couldn't really have any type of virtual meetings with this type of workforce. And then when we implemented that and started to get people involved virtually, they were saying things like, oh, the refinery is a really big place and we're actually saving a lot of time during the day because we're not walking from one side of the refinery to the other, which is taking us 10 minutes in between meetings and then we're running late. We're actually finding that we're more productive. So that was just one thing that we thought, really we should be supporting that and, making sure everybody has an equal footing to begin with. We also felt that we should do a lot better in terms of sharing stories. So we do actually have a number of our frontline workers who are having individual arrangements that are working well. And we needed to start sharing that more to make it acceptable for others and to normalise it. And so we've started doing that on our internal workplace, which is like a Facebook type page. And we're getting great feedback from that. We also found that we got a lot of feedback that that leaders need to be educated more. And this is more of a long-term action for us. But some of our frontline workers said, look, we would actually really like to be thinking about this differently, but we really just don't feel like we can raise it with our supervisor because it's not the done thing or it's not the norm. And so we're looking into ways that we can do that. And that's, to be honest, probably our biggest challenge. And then lastly, we also, and this is again a challenge, but we're trying to create some more what I call fat in the system. So we got a lot of feedback that, I'd love to be thinking about flexibility and I'd love to be doing things differently, but how can I when I'm already covering shifts for people, because we're struggling to get people to come and do overtime, or I can't fit it into I can't fit in my normal day tasks, and then you're expecting me to think about how we can do things in a different way. So that's a real cultural piece that we're also trying to work through. But I can explain a little bit more about some of those as we go along.
Thanks, Miranda. That's great. So I thought I might give a little bit more information about another element of the paper. And Miranda mentioned that that Viva Energy undertook what we call listen and learns. They're focus groups, if you like, with people, with workers on the front line to understand what flexibility looks like for them. And this is the approach that about 10 organisations from a particular group did. So they went out, undertook focus groups with frontline workers. we gathered that information, and essentially what we found was that for site-based workplaces, there were 3 ways perhaps that you could actually look at roles to determine how you could actually apply a flexible lens to it. And so if you think a manufacturing or a frontline kind of workforce, a site, you might have some knowledge-based roles. That might typically be your human resources or finance or strategy or legal. And those kind of roles do have flexibility, which is a little bit different. For example, we found that people in those kind of roles in a site environment could work obviously remotely most of the time if that's what they wanted to. But they also said they were looking to, choose which days they wanted to work on and off a site, work at regional hubs or work part-time, undertake job share. So kind of a more alignment to, I guess, more corporate roles in a corporate environment, but still on site. We then looked at roles which we've termed blended roles, and these are types of roles still within a site environment might require a portion of the time to be on site and during operations times, and it might also require shift work. Examples of these kind of roles could be research scientists, lab technicians, site engineers, site maintenance, field service reps, and frontline supervisors. What we found generally across the organisations that we're looking at is that the best outcome for people working in these kind of roles is, not surprisingly, to talk to people to actually understand, well, what does flexibility look like in your role? What are the kind of adjustments that we can make to enable flexibility in this space? And Miranda hopefully Miranda, you might talk a little bit more about the site engineer and the cameras. I think you may have mentioned that a moment ago. But, the piece around technology really helps people in these kind of environments, these blended roles, to actually have more opportunities for flexible work. And then we also have frontline roles, which are typically roles that are performed on site most or all of the time, often require shift work in a 24/7 operating environments. So people in these roles are typically operators, drivers, technicians, emergency service first responders, front of house hospitality workers, and service advisors. The feedback from people that were in those focus groups indicated that flexibility that they would like to see included flexible rosters, swapping shifts, undertaking a job share or other part-time arrangements, a compressed work week, split shifts, and multi-skilling. And so there's lots of different types of flexibility. And as we've said previously, flexibility is very much an individual perspective. And by talking and speaking with people, you can uncover what that looks like for them. We're not saying that every role has every opportunity for flexible work, but it's about looking at what's possible. Miranda, would you like to perhaps talk about some of those blended work opportunities that you found at Geelong?
So there's 2 that I'll mention just briefly, and it's interesting that they probably wouldn't have been considered blended roles until we started doing some of this work. So there was always the mindset that any role at our Geelong refinery really just had to be done on site, and that couldn't really be done in any other way. But what we found was there was 2 groups in particular that spring to mind. So one are our inspectors. So they're a group of engineers who go out on site and basically inspect equipment to make sure that it's safe. Now, these roles do have a site part of their role, so they do need to be understanding the equipment, but they also do a lot of reporting, report writing, and sort of research. So they put a trial into place where they've been working a couple of days from home, and they've been working that through with their team. So they come on site for a couple of days, they get all the information they need, and then they do the rest at home. And that might sort of sound quite simple, but that's something that was never even thought of in the past. And then another sort of version of that is we have our turnaround team. So turnarounds are major maintenance events where for a few months we have a whole heap of contractors that come in and help us out with maintenance of a big piece of equipment. And this team sat down and talked through what would work for them. And what's been really good for them is that they're able to do all of their planning on a Monday and a Friday, and that can either be done at the refinery or at home. And then Tuesday to Thursday, the team is in at the refinery doing the work that needs to be done on site. So they do that for about 3 months of the year while they're in planning stage, and then they might, they have a block of time where they do need to be on site 100% of the time. But once again, the feedback's been amazing. And back to some of the data that was shared at the start by Lily, it really has, I can see, gone a long way to men in our organisation, and we're very male dominated, sharing lots more examples of where they're caring. So they're taking the opportunity to pick their kids up from school, or on the days that they're working from home, they're going and helping out with sports and children's activities. So it's just it's really starting to get that mindset change that we're really looking for in a place that's historically been quite set in their ways.
Thanks, Miranda. One of the other areas that we heard as a barrier that was coming through from our members as we were talking about enabling flexible work for the frontline workforce was around the enterprise agreements and awards that may be in place, but they may not include opportunities for permanent flexible work. So I'm sure many of you already know the opportunities for flexible work in these kind of environments, but I'll just briefly go over them. And then I'm going to ask Miranda just to talk through some of the examples of how Viva has been enabling flexible work in enterprise agreements. But where individuals are governed by an award or an enterprise agreement, the options for flexibility include incorporating flexibility into the enterprise agreement during the negotiation process, which enables flexible work options for all employees working under the agreement. The second way is through requesting flexible work arrangements, which give employees other than casual employees who have worked the same employer for at least 12 months the ability to request flexible work arrangements if they meet specific criteria. An employer can only refuse such a request on reasonable business grounds. And then the third opportunity, which I think we've heard of a lot today, is around using an individual flexibility agreement, or an IFA, which is a written agreement the employer and employee enter to change the effect of certain clauses in their award or registered agreement. But when we're working with our members, and we still are, we often hear that it's the enterprise agreement, the industrial instruments that's holding back the opportunity to enable flexible work at scale for the workforce. And so Viva has been doing some great work in that respect. Miranda, would you like to talk through some of your examples?
Thanks, Jo. So one of the examples is quite recent at our refinery. So we were going through renegotiation of a maintenance agreement. So that's an EA that applies to boilermakers, electricians and instrumentation technicians. It was about 50 people in that group. And again, interestingly, in the past, flexibility hasn't really come into the negotiations at all. And this time around, we had a number of our team members in those groups actually raise it as an item that they wanted to be put on the table. So that sort of helped open, I guess, the door to those discussions. And I also would say that Scott, our CEO, is very keen for us to obviously think creatively about this, but his view is that, yes, an EA can be seen as a blocker and can be one of those sort of mindset blockers. So you push those groups to a side and say it's all too hard to think about flexibility because of the structure of the EA. But he also says that, look, if you can get your members on board and if you can really understand what they want, and then they're driving it, and then we have that sort of collaborative approach to change, then that's what will make the difference. And that certainly was the case here. So our maintenance staff don't work shift. They were working a 9-day fortnight, but we've had quite a few new young people into those roles, and they were saying, look, we would actually prefer, if possible, to work a 4-day week. And also they were very keen on accessing our purchased leave policy, which is only available to our contracted staff. So we did some work around the commercials and looked at sort of what we could implement at the refinery, given those roles are key to making sure that that the equipment is maintained and the plant's maintained. And we had a number of conversations and worked out that we could actually offer the purchase leave arrangements. We could offer a 4-day working week, and there was another piece around their overtime requirements, which we also looked into, because in the past what we've found is overtime's almost been seen as a very attractive part of the package. So people were really just wanting to work extra so that they could get that overtime, and that's completely changed these days. So now we have people who come in and they're happy to do their normal hours, but they don't want to do a huge amount of overtime. So we also looked at that, and we've reshaped the way that their hours will work. They can opt into certain levels of overtime, but they don't have to do that. And we've actually found that overall the business case has been that for them to work the 4 days rather than the 9-day fortnight is actually beneficial for the business in terms of the way our shift rosters work in our operational teams. So that's one. And then secondly, we also have a number of refuelers at small and major airports around the country. And due to the way that the planes need to be refueled, so early in the morning, planes are taking off, and then sort of later in the afternoon they also are, but there's more of a break in the middle. And so what we've done is we've actually changed rosters so that there's opportunity for people to be working different hours or shorter hours. And what we've found with that is it's been quite hard work, I'll be honest, but we have actually had a number of females come into those refueler roles now. So one sort of, I guess, creative way we looked at it was we opened up to AFLW players in Melbourne, and we now have some AFLW players who are able to train, and then they fit in a role with us as a refueler at the Melbourne airport, and they're loving it. And because they have that sort of physical background as well, that they find that the role's quite satisfying for them, and they're able to manage both. So it's thinking about things a bit differently. Thanks, Jo.
Thanks, Miranda. So I guess in summary, I'm coming up to wind up time. I think that there's probably about 4 different principles that we have identified. Other papers also identify similar themes as well. But in terms of enabling successful flexible workplace opportunities, it is about an expectation of high performance, and it's about setting the scene, having visible leadership on flexibility, really championing for flexibility across the entire workforce, not just your corporate staff. So it's very much about inclusion for all and responding to the individual needs of people. But also importantly, it's in genuine enablement. So making sure that the work is designed properly, that we have people who can have the conversation, so your line managers are trained up, and the tools and technology are also in place to ensure that the roles are being done safely and in supportive ways. So the 4 principles that we talk about are an expectation of high performance, visible leadership being critical, inclusion for all, and genuine enablement. Miranda, did you want to just talk about how that works or what that looks like for Viva Energy?
Sure. So I don't think we would have got anywhere without that leadership from the top. And I mentioned earlier that for us, it's fantastic to be working with a CEO who really does drive it. We've recently had a few town halls, and just one example is Scott has asked for this to be a topic. It's a virtual town hall where everyone in the organisation dials in, and we have had people working in frontline roles and in corporate roles talking about their experiences with flexible working, and that's gone a long way to really changing the mindsets and normalising it once again. So Scott keeps it on the agenda all the time, and he has the support of the executive leadership team then that flows down. So that would be the number one thing that really has helped us. There's some other things which I've already mentioned, like technology. We're still working at that, but that can actually have a massive difference to the experience of people. And without understanding what people need, then it's hard to do that. So we're continually surveying our team members to understand sort of what the feedback is around that. And we've also looked at it quite sort of holistically, I guess. So this is the cultural piece. So we call it Viva Ways of Working is our I guess our program, and that's split into 3 areas. So we have Viva Flex, which talks about the various ways and the various constructs of how we work. We have Viva Tech, which is the technology piece. And then we have Viva Connect, which I haven't touched on too much, but we're very clear that we want to make sure that flexibility works for both the organisation and for team members. But we've put in place a number of things that help people connect whilst they're working in different ways. So it's things like People Connect that we run on a monthly basis, which is on various topics, and everyone's able to dial into that, including some very small and remote locations. So I think the other thing I'd say, Joe, is that it can't be looked at in isolation. It needs to be quite a holistic approach to making that change and to getting that sort of to leveraging that. So thank you.
That's great. Thanks, Miranda. Thank you so much for sharing all the fantastic examples that are coming through from Viva Energy. And I might pass it back now to Rose, I think, and open it up to questions in a moment.
Thank you, Joe and Miranda. That was absolutely fascinating to hear about, I guess, what is possible in what is obviously a very male-dominated industry, site-based, shift work, yet there is such scope for flexible work in action, and that idea of experimenting and sharing what you're doing, I think is a really important one. But anyway, let's keep the conversation going. I now am going to introduce Kate Diamond-Keith, who is Senior Regional Consultant at Women's Health Grampians, who will be facilitating today's panel. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Rose. We're talking over each other. Thank you, Rose. As Rose says, I'm Kate, and I'm coming to you today on Wathaurong country. And yes, I will be facilitating our panel discussion today with our wonderful speakers. And thank you to Joe and Miranda and Lily for their very insightful presentations. I've been furiously writing notes. They've been so insightful and so fantastic. It's been great presentations. So yes, we're going to be having an interactive conversation now with our wonderful guest speakers, where everyone here today can have the opportunity to ask some questions. They've been simmering away. I know I've been simmering away myself with lots of questions. I've had a few come through already, one on the general chat and a few in the private chat. So the idea for this discussion is you are welcome to put them into the chat and I can ask them for our panellists today. You can do them for specific speakers or just in general, or please also use the raise the hand function on Zoom, and I will I'll ask you to turn your mic on and ask the question for the panel. Does anyone have a question that they would like to ask, to raise their hand and ask in person? If not, we do already have one in the chat. I'll have a quick look, scroll through. No one's raised their hand so far. I'll keep an eye on that, but there was a question from Katia. Katia is working with a commercial construction company who have a workforce of 16, all working in project management and site management roles, and all other trade roles are contracted out. While management would like to offer more flexible work options for their staff, they struggle to identify ways how site managers, etc., can work shorter days or job share due to OH&S requirements for site managers to open site in the morning and close at the end of the day, and needing to be on site at all times. And having site managers' role sharing will be challenging when it comes to communication with many contractors and changing worksite conditions. Do you have any advice here? And that was for Joe and Miranda.
There's lots there, and I can relate to most of it, really. I guess there's one thing that that we have done, and I think it goes to just really challenging the way that things are done. So in the past, what happened was we had to have people on our sites by 7:30 in the morning to do, what are they called? Toolbox talks. And that meant, you know, you just had to be there, you had to be on site, and, you know, there was no way that people ever thought that could be done differently. I'm not sure whether this is an option, but I guess it's just one example. We started to allow the toolbox talks to be done virtually, and so what that meant was if it was possible and someone needed to come in, say, an hour later and be on site at 8:30 and work later on, they could dial in from home. And it allowed supervisors also to be going in and out of different toolbox discussions that were going on. So I know that, you know, that's probably not the be all and end all, but it's just one example of how, if you just can think in sort of slightly different ways and experiment with things, then maybe that's somewhere to start. The experimentation's been really important for us. Just doing some little, you know, small things and then getting that feedback, and then that tends to kind of get the momentum going. So I'm not sure whether that's helpful.
I think that's really good, Miranda, around experimenting. Jo?
I think the other piece here, and I know that, you know, you touched on it, Miranda, but I think engaging with the team to actually understand their ideas, because what we found was that most often the ideas come from the team members themselves, and, you know, they're really wanting to have an opportunity to work flexibly, and they'll often come up with the ideas themselves. And so then, you know, it's around the experimentation, the trust that is built to actually try some of these opportunities. The other one that comes to mind, Miranda, is the part-time operators. So not specifically a construction site, but the opportunities that Viva's developed for part-time operators. So very traditional full-time roles in a shift situation. So similar, I guess, in a way to what was described by Katja, but maybe you could touch on that just as an example, because that's another way of looking at things differently.
Yeah, so this was another one where we just had to try things differently. Our operators were traditionally have traditionally been men with a trades background, and so we did some work on trying to understand what really is there any blockers to having more diverse candidates coming into those roles. And it was then about challenging, well, what do we actually need in the role? And we worked out that it could be done really by anyone. You didn't actually need a trades background for it. There was no qualification as such. And we also then thought, okay, well, these roles work a shift, but why couldn't we just split that shift in half? So it's the same amount of people, it's the same cost, but it just means that you could potentially have 2 people working one operator role. And by doing that, we then were able to attract a number of women. So going back to 2015, we only had 4%. There's 190 operators on site and we only had 4% female. In 2018, we were able to increase that to 9%. And then in 2022, we now have 25% of our operators. So we have 46 females working in those roles. And look, there have been some challenges with that, and it's taken some work, and it's taken, you know, some thinking and organising things differently. But if you just sort of stand back and look at, was there, you know, what really was the cost to the organisation? There wasn't really, you know, anything that was costly, and then we're getting a huge amount of feedback about how much it's changing the culture and the dynamics at the refinery. So, you know, I think once again, it just really comes back to having, you know, having that different way of thinking and trying to drive some change, which I know it's not easy. But we've had success with that, and our engagement scores at the refinery via our surveys, and I know that's only one measure, but again, they've gone through the roof over the last few years, because we're thinking not only about women, but just about diversity in general, and finding that even some of our team members who have been around for a very long time are really appreciating the conversations that we're having around differences. That's been great.
Great, thanks. We've had another question come through about evaluation. Sorry, I just lost it for a second. This person would like to know if you've done any evaluation at 6 months or 12 months around the longer term impacts of flexibility on the organisation and individuals and families. Has any of that work been done?
So we're still, with our Viva ways of working, we implemented that about 18 months ago. And so we've been doing sort of pulse surveys across the organisation and getting great results from that. And then the other thing that I guess is a measure is we have some targets around some of this. So they're gender targets, but there's also some targets around trying to increase men in part-time roles, for example, or increase men just working flexibly just to help. So we are reviewing that, but we're still probably, it's a bit too early to really see any huge kind of impact yet. But we will be continuing with that.
We'll work on that.
Yep.
Lily, there's one that's come through for you. So in your talk, you talked about how Nikki encourages staff to work flexibly. She doesn't mind, you know, where the staff do their work or when, as long as you do the work. How does this flexibility approach support workplace culture and connectivity amongst staff? How does the organisation manage that, do you think?
Yeah, look, it's a really good one, and one that we are constantly reviewing and putting new ideas into and talking about as a management group, but also as a wider team. Miranda touched on it before, mentioning that I think Scott always keeps it on the agenda, and I think that's one of the most important things, is that, you know, we're all still fresh to this. We're all still learning in this post-COVID world of how we do hybrid in the best way we can, and that's going to require a flexible approach. You might try some things and they don't work, but again, as Miranda and Joel both said, it's having that experimental mindset of being willing to try things and not work, and then say, okay, if that didn't work, what else can we do different? What can we try next? So we have a bunch of parents who not all, but a lot of them have school pickup time. So as a general rule, we as a team try to not set meetings around that 3 and 4 o'clock time period. We try and do like the morning. We tried for a while to not do meetings in lunch breaks, but then we found that pushed into the after school hours kind of time slot. So that required another shift. And, you know, we're also just starting to come back into the office, which is really exciting. And it's nice to be in an office environment and to be seeing your colleagues and be able to go and get coffee in the morning and do things like that. But it's also really important and something that we're continuing to work on around how we can make sure that those at home aren't feeling like they're disconnected as a part of that. So again, something that Joel and Miranda touched on is how can we use technology to try and improve that and work with that. And one of the things we've done is purchase this Surface Hub, which means that when we're doing people from home, everyone who's in the office can be in the same thing. instead of all being on your computers in different areas of the office, all trying to kind of speak over the top of each other. And we've found that that has actually facilitated better conversations because the people in the room are more conscious of who the next person is talking, as opposed to when everyone's on their laptops in the office trying to talk over each other and hearing two of the same voice. So even just small things like that, how can you use technology to try and help you? But yeah, I think the main thing is keeping it on the agenda and discussing how you can improve it, because we're going to learn so much. We've already learned so much in the last 6 to 12 months about hybrid working, and that's only going to continue. You know, I think it's a really important one for senior leadership to always turn him, but keeping it on the agenda, even just in your team discussions or your discussions with colleagues, is a really important way to keep this moving forward as well.
Great. Jo or Miranda, did you have anything you wanted to add to that question? I have other questions, but I just thought if you had anything.
I'm fine, thanks.
I was just going to say, I echo Lily's comments, and we've really tried to put it on our senior leadership group to have discussions with their teams about what's going to work for them. And it's different. We have commercial people who are out on the road dealing with customers. We obviously have frontline people, but we also have a number of just head office based sort of corporate roles. And it's going to be different for everyone, but it needs to be constantly reviewed. So is it working for our customers? Is it working for other people within the business that we deal with? Is it working for us personally? And we're starting to get now into that kind of continuous improvement sort of, you know, thinking around just having those open discussions.
Yep, that's great. I have another question. Miranda mentioned that it is entirely up to the office-based staff to work out their own flexible work arrangements. The question was, how do you advertise jobs in the first place? I mean, are the jobs advertised as 100% flexible? You know, how do you work that out?
So our jobs are advertised, and I can't remember the exact wording, but there's a blurb around that we consider all flexible working arrangements, whether, you know, they be working from home, part-time, etc. And then what we find it works really well is to have the conversation early if someone applies for a role. So in that first interview, we actually talk about flexibility. What does it mean to you? How could we make sure that that's supported and that suits the role as well? So that part of it doesn't sort of create really any issues as long as there's that open dialogue. We have come from a place in the past where it was, yeah, as I said before, almost frowned upon to work from home. Then we've worked through COVID, and we were initially, we sort of had this guideline or rule of you should be in the office 2 to 3 days a week. So we went through that for a few months, and we got some feedback that didn't particularly work that well. And now it's really based on trust, which is amazing for our organisation. So it's about understanding what's going to work, and then everyone also understanding that if there's an issue that we have to be, pardon the pun, flexible to change again. So we're really finding that that's, as I said before, just opening up other opportunities for outside of work, like caring responsibilities, and we're seeing improvements in other areas. So, yep.
That's great. Thanks, Miranda. We also had another question come through around those industrial agreements. So of the 3 industrial arrangements, including the EBA, individual flexible agreements, what gets used the most? What do you think?
It was interesting. I think that Lily had some really interesting data indicating the type of flexibility that people were picking up, and I imagine that was through individual flexibility agreement, because based on the information that we have had from our members, there's not a lot of enterprise agreements that have a lot of flexibility built in. And so that's why we talk about building sustainable flexibility at scale. Well, this is obviously particularly for people who are on enterprise agreements or awards, but in this case, frontline as well. So I think it would potentially depend on the environment, and I'll hand it back to Miranda and Lily for your perspectives.
I would agree, Joe. I'm just trying to think. I think it's a bit of a mix for us. So we've been trying, as you know, as I mentioned, with our EAs, because that then affects a larger number of people, and we do have some individual arrangements. But to be perfectly honest, we don't have that many, and I think that's in the operational environments. That's maybe because some of those team members don't really understand that they can put their hand up and ask. So we're trying to kind of promote that a little bit more. So I'd say from our Viva Energy perspective, we don't have a lot of individual arrangements. There's probably a handful. And we're just trying to do more around the EA side, only because then you get that more blanket kind of improvement approach.
I'm not sure what, sorry, I'm just going to jump in, because in terms of the data we've collected through the Gender Equality Act, it's based on formal flexible working arrangements, and this was actually one of the things that came up in a recent review we've done into the audit process, is that we know even in our team we have a lot of people on informal flexible working arrangements, and so there's a plethora of ways you can do this, and it also means that we have a bit of work to do around, is the data that we're collecting really encompassing everything that's going on, because some people prefer to enter into formal flexible working arrangements and that works for them and it works in that situation. So again, I really agree with Miranda and Joe. It sounds like it's a case-by-case kind of situation as the best approach in where we are right now in the piece, but that could certainly change. Another thing I just wanted to point out on this point is that under the Gender Equality Act, the Commissioner has the ability to undertake dispute resolution, and that can be raised with the Commissioner by public sector organisations covered by the Act if it relates to a systemic gender equality issue. So a systemic gender equality issue, one that relates to one or more people, and it has to relate to one or more of the gender equality indicators under the Act, which I mentioned before. But one of them that we use as an example all the time is unreasonable limitations on flexible working arrangements that have unequal impact on people of different genders or with caring responsibilities. So it's also worth noting that there are some avenues for recourse through this if a formal flexible working arrangement isn't being taken on by your workplace, and there's different options, and I know the Victorian Equal Opportunity and Human Rights Commission has some interesting information around this as well. So I would say, yeah, it's different every time. Always have the conversations, and then really last kind of recourse is there should be other avenues that can be pursued depending on your workplace arrangements.
Well, we've now run out of time. We've come to the end of our time. Gee, that went really quickly. Look, thank you so much to Joe, Miranda and Lily for participating in that really great discussion. There were such insightful questions from our audience today, so thank you for your participation and for your questions. It was a really great discussion. And again, thank you to our guest speakers today. They were really insightful presentations. I think everyone has really got a lot out of our guest speakers today. I'm now going to do the conclusion and wrap up. I'm going to be starting with talking about some of our upcoming events. Of course, it's 16 Days of Activism coming up starting next week. 16 Days of Activism Against Gender-Based Violence is an annual global campaign dedicated to ending gender-based violence, starting on the 25th of November, which is International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women. It's an opportunity to raise awareness about the key role that gender inequality plays in driving violence against women and calls for action to prevent it. WHD staff are going to be dropping some information into the chat around 16 Days of Activism, so have a look out for that and download some documents. For 16 Days of Activism, Women's Health Grampians is having an event called CoRE Conversations on the 28th of November, 12 till 12:30. It's online. The topic is taking action during 16 Days of Activism. We'll be launching our new revised Taking Action Guide for CoRE members, aligning with the evidence-based framework and new action areas outlined by Our Watchers Change the Story 2nd edition. So you can register for that now. It's only only half an hour. Please come along and see our new Taking Action guide. We also have our AGM happening next week on the 23rd of November at the Pomonal Hall in Pomonal at 11:30 a.m. And we have our keynote address, Women in a Changing World. Erica Lind, the Senior Forest and Fire Management Officer from the Department of Environment, Land, Water and Planning, is going to be our guest speaker. So please come along to that if you would like to. I think Erica will be a great guest speaker. And lastly, of course, we have an evaluation form for this community of practice, which we would really love everyone to fill out. This does help shape our future community of practice events and what you as CoRE members would like to see explored in the way of topics or guest speakers in future events. And you can complete this form via the QR code that is on the screen or a link that has been placed in the chat. So that would be really helpful if everyone could click on that or use the QR code now to fill that out. So there's some upcoming events and opportunities. Please take advantage of them if you can. And then lastly, thank you to everybody for coming along to our community of practice today. Thanks for attending. I'd like to thank again all our guest speakers for their input and valuable time for this community of practice. We will be sending out an email to participants with some of the resources and information from today, and we've also recorded this session today, and the recording will also be sent out. And if there's any follow-up or if you have any questions, please contact your Women's Health Grampians regional consultant for more information, and the contacts are on the screen for you today. So thank you everybody, and have a good afternoon. Thank you.